I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, but this story happened when I was 15. I'm also from France. When I was 15 and just got into my junior year, I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account, and as far as location, I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that many people, so my timeline wasn't really that interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me a quite strange direct message. It was a 200 followers account, and the message was like, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in," stating my hometown. "Because I'll soon move in and go to that town's high school, and I'm looking for friends." The town he said was obviously the town I lived in. I immediately thought something was wrong because there was nowhere on my profile I said where I actually lived, but after some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet that I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city, so I told myself that he must have looked up for that town and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and since he was polite, I answered him. I told him that I was indeed from that town and I go to the high school there. The discussion was natural, and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions like, "Do you live far away from the school? In a house or an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you? You're not often home alone, right?" I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him. The next day, the same thing. We talked a lot, and he was still asking personal questions to know me better, so I asked him too, and he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house, though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed because I had been bullied for years, and even today, I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back-to-school day, he finally told me he was coming to my high school because he had finally moved in with his mom and asked about a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him and told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said that he would prefer an isolated place because he was afraid he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd-floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I was still in school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back-to-school day, I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothes, I counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time had arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He wasn't a catfish. He looked quite like his profile, but I still noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he had told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot, we got along well, and I was so pleased. And at the end of the break, he had asked me to go to the fast food restaurant with him for lunch. I said no because I didn't have any money and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's kind of my principle. He seemed disappointed but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed, again, but finally accepted. And that's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the 3rd-floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to the bus stop after classes. A surprising fact is that I never saw him in the hallways nor at the cafeteria, but I thought that at the time that the building was huge and there was over 1,500 students in here, so if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way we could meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening because my dad was abroad for work. My brother was always at his friend's house. My little sis was on a school trip and my mom had to work late that very night. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks I thought I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got in the bus, waved at him, and put on my earphones. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 5:45 p.m. in December, so it was already really dark outside, and as I got out of the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation in my stomach, and I felt like I was being watched. I pressed the pause on my music, but kept my earphones in, so that people thought that I couldn't hear anything, and that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, so there was no visibility on the big road that the bus dropped me off on. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood that I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well-intentioned. At least, I could hear that he was not accelerating, so he was not trying to catch up to me, but I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran, as fast as I could, the best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and to close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which, by the way, confirmed that I was home alone, and took a look through the glass panel on the door. It's not a peephole, it's a whole window, so if someone wanted to see what's happening inside, they can. And it was Rob. A few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for a chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police then. I was completely paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a few minutes, and when I took back control over my body, I ran into the kitchen to get a knife and got back to the door. He was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't. That moment, when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, was the longest I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and got back to the door. He looked angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house and Rob ran away, probably thinking it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with his story, but quickly after, some accounts which had been created followed me. Their ats were all a series of numbers and the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one would follow me. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop, and it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I haven't met him again in days, but not a single one even heard about a Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school, and that is why I've never met him apart from our daily meetings, and that is probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him anymore, and I'm still asking myself, what did he want, and what could have happened that night?
One night when I was 15 years old, I arrived home just after midnight and my parents were already in bed. I decided to leave the back door unlocked for my older brother since he was sleeping over a friend's house. Big mistake. In the middle of the night, I awoke to feel something cold and metallic pressing on my neck. At first I thought it was my brother playing a prank on me, but then I couldn't see the pitch black bedroom. Then a big hairy hand covered my nose and mouth. I couldn't breathe. I heard a deep rasping voice say, "If you make any noise, I'll kill you." After my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the shape of a man leaning over me. There was no face, just a black mask with holes cut out for the eyes. He was holding a knife to my throat. I knew my parents were asleep in the next room, so I tried to make as much noise as I could, but the man's hand muffled my screams. I kicked my legs trying to bang on the walls so my parents could hear. All of a sudden, through the screams, I can hear my parents get up and they're running towards my room. When my parents opened the bedroom door, they were confronted by a terrifying scene. All they could see in the darkened room was a big black silhouette bent over me and holding a knife to my throat. As soon as he saw the knife, my father jumped on top of the intruder and struggled with him. My mother grabbed the man's wrist and wrestled the knife out of his hand. My father managed to get his arm around the masked man's neck and began to choke him. I grabbed my cell phone and I ran outside to call 911 as my parents kept the intruder pinned to the bedroom floor until the police arrived. The bedroom door burst open and a police officer ran in holding a gun, yelling, "Don't move or I'll blow your head off." The police handcuffed the intruder and dragged him out of the house. When police searched the man's truck, they found a variety of weapons and some bloody clothes. It turned out that the masked man had already murdered 2 people a few days before. My family and we had no way of knowing it, but we just captured a serial killer. And the scariest part about this is that it can happen to anyone at any time. This was real. The killer's name is Adam Leroy Lane, and he'll be spending the next 25 years to 30 years in prison. What I've learned from this is to always lock my back door.